Hey, good morning everybody. Steve here in Cypress, California. I'm back at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Cypress, and today it's a really beautiful sunny morning. And I'm sitting here waiting for the gates to open. It's only 7:30 and they don't open till 8 o'clock. Unfortunately, a lot of the cemeteries here in the Los Angeles area don't open till 8 or 9 o'clock. And when I drive in from Palm Springs, I usually get an early start because you just never know, what the traffic is going to be like. So sometimes I just end up waiting to get in, but that's okay. They'll be opening soon. And it gives me a chance to tell you a little bit about who I'm here to visit today. Disneyland's only, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes from here. It's not very far away at all. And if you're a Disney fan, I'm sure you remember that Disneyland opened back in 1955. It was the summer of 1955. And less than 9 years after they opened, on May 9th, 1964, Disneyland had its first fatality on a ride. I believe it was their first fatality in the park, but I'm not positive on that, so don't quote me on that. So here's what happened. 15-year-old Myca Maples was at Disneyland with two of his friends. They decided to ride the Matterhorn. It was actually a Friday night. Apparently he was sitting in the middle and one of his friends was in front of him and one of his friends was behind him. As they reached the top of the peak, apparently for whatever reason he unbuckled his seatbelt, or at least that's what was reported, that he unbuckled his seatbelt, he stood up, but the ride was going and it was fast. After he stood up, he hit his head on the side of the concrete mountain and was thrown out of the car. Now, his friend who was sitting behind saw his body fly out of the bobsled. The ride is going so fast and it's so bumpy, it's hard to know what's going on. And it was night and fairly dark, so they really didn't see exactly what happened. He was thrown out of the bobsled, bashed his head, and landed on the side of the tracks. He was rushed to the hospital and was in critical condition, and sadly, after 3 days, died from his injuries. At the time, there were rumors or reports that he did it as a hazing prank to get into a local club that had been started. I believe it was outside of campus. He was at high school at the time, going to Stanford Junior High School. His friends said they didn't think he was being hazed. They had talked to him about joining the club, I guess, just a few days before going to Disneyland, and he said he didn't want to join the club and didn't want to do the hazing. So who knows? This was so long ago. Who knows what the truth is, but for some reason, it did seem as if he had unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, which is what caused the accident. So for whatever reason he did that, doesn't really matter. He was still tragically killed for being a dumb teenager, which I think most of us can relate to. I did a lot of dumb things as a teenager, and I'm sure most of you did too. It's just what we do, especially if you're a young teenage boy. For whatever reason, we feel invincible and as if we're going to live forever. But sadly, once in a while, fate has other plans for us. Now, Mark was the first fatality on the Matterhorn, but he wasn't the last. On January 3rd, 1984, 48-year-old Dolly Regina Young also was killed on the Matterhorn. And once again, it appeared as if she had unbuckled her seatbelt and at some point was thrown out of the ride. I mean, it's a very fast and bumpy ride. If you've been on the Matterhorn, you know it. You pretty much have to hang on. It's a pretty intense roller coaster. Her accident happened at 3:30 in the afternoon, and the ride attendant said that he definitely double-checked all of the seatbelts and they were all on when her bobsled took off. Afterwards, they inspected the bobsled and there was no malfunction with the seatbelt. So it appears that she intentionally unbuckled the seatbelt, and who knows if she stood up or how she fell out of the bobsled, but once she did, according to the report, she was run over and killed by the next bobsled. She was 48 years old, so you don't have to be a teenager to do dumb things or to die from a tragic accident. Maybe she wanted to take her own life, it's hard to say. And it was so long ago, I don't remember. I suppose back then, we didn't have seatbelts in the car back in the 1950s and 60s. So it's very likely that it was just a seatbelt that you could buckle and unbuckle yourself. And these days, at least on all the roller coasters that I've been in, and I love riding roller coasters, and I've ridden a lot of them, these days they have like this bar that comes down. So I think you're first you're strapped in with a seatbelt, then there's also this secondary protection with a bar that comes down, and you're not able to move that. Either the ride or the ride attendant is the one who activates that to go up or down. So it's almost impossible now to stand up in a roller coaster or fly out of a roller coaster. I suppose anything can happen. People figure out ways to do just about anything. But at least it's much, much more difficult for things like that to happen these days, which is good. So Dolly Regina Young was from Fremont, California. And she does have a Find a Grave Memorial page, but it says the whereabouts of her gravesite is unknown. If any of you happen to know, please share with us, and I would definitely try to visit her gravesite. It's possible she was cremated and her family is holding on to her remains. That happens a lot. Mark Maples was buried right here at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Cypress, California, which, as I mentioned earlier, is not that far from Disneyland. And according to his Find a Grave Memorial page, he's laid to rest right in front of the white chapel that you see there. I've been to the chapel section of this cemetery to visit a couple of other people, but I didn't know at the time that he was laid to rest here. In fact, I was here just a couple of months ago, and I didn't discover until just a couple of weeks ago that he's laid to rest here. So let's go see if we can find Mark's gravesite and pay our respects and remember him after all of these years. Hopefully I'll be able to find his gravesite this morning. It doesn't have a GPS, but it does have directions and pretty good pictures, so I think I should be able to find it. And while I was researching this story before coming here this morning, I was curious just how many people die on roller coasters here in the US every year. And it's a very small number. It's about 4, at least according to the report that I saw online. I mean, any number of deaths on roller coasters are too much, but compared to so many other ways to die, very few people die on roller coasters, which is good. And even of those 4, approximately 4 a year, I think the report said at least half of those deaths are usually from a medical condition. You know, like maybe the person has a heart attack while they're riding the ride, and that makes a lot of sense too. Last time I rode a roller coaster, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. It was a pretty intense roller coaster, actually over here, pretty close, over at Knott's Berry Farm. It was probably the scariest roller coaster I've ever been on. So here it is in a really nice location, just right in front of the white chapel here. I just added a GPS to make it a little bit easier, just in case you plan to visit yourself in the future. I have to say I'm very surprised but impressed that his headstone still looks really nice after all these decades. I'm wondering if maybe it's been replaced over the years. I mean, it really does look almost like new, which is very rare after all these years. So let me continue to pan around here so you can see what this section looks like. And so many of you have asked me to slow down when I pan that I'm trying to go a lot slower these days. If you've been watching my videos for a while, then you know that this section here is where actor Myca Dinh is also buried. He was only 7 years old when he was tragically killed in a helicopter accident on the set of the Twilight Zone movie back in 1982. His gravesite is just a few rows away, and I'll put a link down below to that video just in case you missed it. Mark was only 4 years older than me, and I do remember hearing this story back when I was a kid. And we lived just about 45 minutes away from Disneyland, and I rode the Matterhorn every year when I was growing up. But to be honest, I don't really remember thinking much about his accident back then, but now, after visiting his gravesite today, I'm sure that any future rides I may take on the Matterhorn, I'll be thinking about Mark and Dolly. This week I want to give a shout out and a big thank you to my newest Patreon supporters, Kevin Cole and Mina Federica. Thank you, Kevin and Mina, for your generous donations to my channel. They mean a lot and they're very appreciated. Like so many visits to the cemetery, this was a sad one, but I'm happy to keep Mark's memory alive, and I'm glad all of you joined me today. So until our next trip to the cemetery, thanks for sharing the memories, everybody.